And so today's presentation will be on Dhyana Marga, the path of meditation. And John Powers, who lives in Raleigh, is that where you live?
No, Norfolk, yes.
Norfolk, Virginia,
has
kindly stepped up to offer this presentation. It's a very difficult subject. And I will give him a screen share. And without any further ado, Mr. John Powers.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. So I would venture that most of us here are familiar with the word dhyana from our study of the voice of the silence, especially where the 7 virtues are enumerated. There it's spoken of as Dhyana, whose golden gate, once open, leads the Narjal toward the realm of Sat eternal and its ceaseless contemplation. And then the voice goes on to say, before thou canst approach the last, O weaver of thy freedom, thou hast to master these paramitas of perfection, the virtues transcendental, 6 and 10 in number, along the weary path. And I'm sure every traveler on the path of renunciation realizes the importance of these paramitas, but the discipline of meditation seems to be singled out further on in the voice when it's called Dhyana Marga, the path of meditation. Now, dhyana itself is explained in various ways through all the 3 fragments that we've been given. And there are sort of several checkpoints indicated throughout the book. First, there's the passage, before thine hand is lifted to upraise the 4th gate's latch, thou must have mastered all the mental changes in thyself and slain the army of the thought sensations that subtle and insidious creep unasked within the soul's bright shrine. As we read further, we find out how difficult this task is and why it's so important. Thou hast to reach that fixity of mind in which no breeze, however strong, can waft an earthly thought within. Thus purified, the shrine must of all action, sound, or earthly light be void. E'en as the butterfly, o'ertaken by the frost, falls lifeless at the threshold, so must all earthly thoughts fall dead before the fane. And then we come to statements like the one you saw on the opening screen, Buddha's make for yourself an island. The voice says, build high, Lanu, the wall that shall hedge in the holy isle, the dam that will protect thy mind from pride and satisfaction at thoughts of the great feat achieved. Thine isle is the deer, thy thoughts the hounds that weary and pursue his progress to the stream of life. Woe to the deer that is o'ertaken by the barking fiends before he reach the vale of refuge, Dhyana Marga, a path of pure knowledge named. And lastly, we come to what is the hardest requirement for the personal man, the mango principle. The voice says, ere thou canst settle in Dhyana Marga and call it thine, thy soul has to become as the ripe mango fruit, as soft and sweet as its bright golden pulp for others' woes, as hard as that fruit stone for thine own throes and sorrows, O conqueror of weal and woe. This mango simile enjoins the aspirant to develop a sense of total responsibility for ourselves before we can master dhyana. The correct mental posture is one of never descending to transfer blame to anything or anyone outside ourselves. And mastery of dhyana is only possible if we cease to identify ourselves with our personal sheaths while still assuming full responsibility for their defects. This is certainly not the path of escapism. Adopting this mental posture is the only way we can put ourselves fully in line with the universal law of harmony to gain the moral and psychological strength needed to consciously withdraw from the astral form and eventually to dissipate that form at will one of the essential tasks of real self-mastery. From the Gupta Vidya essay, Involution, through deep meditation, each aspirant must acquire a capacity for effortless resonance with the minds and hearts of all other aspirants, and thereby learn to come closer to Mahat, the cosmic mind behind manifested nature and the great hebdomadal heart of all humanity. Without such systematic self-training in personal invulnerability, impermeability to lower titanic forces, and a quickened sense of the immortality of the soul, it is not possible for the Lanu Shravaka to become fully attuned to the collective mind and heart of the human race. In order to become a candidate for initiation into the mysteries, it is necessary to draw closer to the living center of universal humanity, and therefore to draw apart from mundane concerns. In practice, this means developing the capacity to withdraw from the sensorium and to enter transcendental states of consciousness through meditation based upon intensified powers of concentration, calm contemplation, and a greater continuity of consciousness in spirit. Mystically, this means attuning oneself to the music of the spheres and becoming able to listen amidst diverse temporal circumstances to the soundless sound, the voice of the silence. The voice of the silence concludes the teachings about Dhyana Marga with these statements. For as the diamond buried deep within the throbbing heart of earth can never mirror back the earthly lights, so are thy mind and soul. Plunged in Dhyana Marga, these must mirror naught of Maya's realm elusive. A task far harder still awaits thee. Thou hast to feel thyself all thought, and yet exile all thoughts from out thy soul. The Dhyana gate is like an alabaster vase, white and transparent. Within there burns a steady golden fire, the flame of prajna that radiates Atma. Thou art that vase. True spiritual individuality is only possible within the context of the self of all. And thus the problem of meditation undertaken for the sake of the personal self is that the personal self is an unreality. It does not actually exist as anything more than a collection of habits and thought patterns, reactions and impulses and tendencies carried by the elementals that make up the lower vestures, the desire mind and the astral form. As the Buddha taught, there is no real being there. It is an illusory fiction that appears to be a being. We are actually not that personal self. Our real identity is that of an immortal spiritual being who is responsible for a set of lower vestures for a short while. Thus, we follow the path of meditation initially to make a change in our sense of self, to overcome the idea that we are material beings and separate egos, then to make a radical change in consciousness in our class of memories and our class of karmas, and thereby make a change in the life atoms in our vestures. We are trying to separate our minds from the influence of desire and from the polluting influence of astral images and energies. We are trying to learn to participate self-consciously in spiritual evolution by taking full control of our lower vestures in the service of Krishna Christos, the higher self. We are trying to increase the ratio of the unmanifest to the manifest, thus creating an intense inner life through meditation. We are trying to gain greater control over our conscious energies, an internal refinement of consciousness that is actually the method of evolution itself, which acts to spiritualize and to etherealize the complex natures of all beings. We are trying to use our thoughts to bind ourselves to the rest of humanity and to the universe. We are trying to raise ourselves in consciousness to the level of those perfected beings who are one with the one self of all. And we are trying to conceptualize some elements of eternal wisdom into forms that can be used by other human beings who, like ourselves, are struggling within the folds of matter. And we are trying to bring those thought forms down into our sphere where they can be used by others. In doing so, we come into contact with similar efforts by other theophilanthropists, as Professor Iyer noted in his Gupta Vidya essay, Dhyana Marga. It is possible to bring down onto the plane of mundane human existence glimpses and rays, sparks and flashes of that divine light of wisdom, which is all potent on its own plane, but is otherwise latent and unavailable. Collectively, a group of human beings can become like a great lens for the drawing down of the light of unmanifest wisdom into our globe to meet the cries of pain, the hungers and the longings of myriads of minds and hearts. And finally, Dhyana Marga is a part of the only path that can lead us to the world inhabited by those who are self-consciously immortal and who look over and guide the evolution of humanity throughout the Mahayuga and throughout the dark night of Pralaya. If we turn for guidance and meditation to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, we find at the very beginning of that little work something that could be perplexing to some. When he introduces the term yoga, it's not what most Westerners would expect. Yoga in Sanskrit means union or integration, while sutra means sacred thread, or it could be short sentence. There are 195 of these sacred threads in the 4 little books of the Yoga Sutras. They're titled Samadhi Pada, Sadhana Pada, Vibhuti Pada, and Kaivalya Pada. And they all deal with the path of union with the highest self. The quote form of yoga that Patanjali teaches is what is called the Taraka Raja Yoga, or the royal yoga, the discipline of which is, in the words of Professor Iyer in Vibhuti Yoga, an essay, so the form of yoga that Patanjali teaches is not a narrowly technical or specialized practice to be added to other instrumental activities in the world. It is rather the indispensable means for radically transforming one's essential perception of, and therefore one's entire relation to, the world. From the standpoint of self-knowledge, which is ultimate gnosis, there are no greater disciplines. Book 1, the Samadhi Pada, points to a fundamental truth which must be understood even before we begin the practice of meditation and self-study. The state of abstract meditation, and this is from Book 1, verses 23 through 26, the state of abstract meditation may be attained by profound devotedness toward the Supreme Spirit, considered in its comprehensible manifestation as Ishvara. Ishvara is a spirit untouched by troubles, works, fruits of works, or desires. And Ishvara becomes infinite, that omniscience which in man exists, but as a germ. Ishvara is the preceptor of all, even of the earliest of created beings, for he is not limited by time. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that there dwelleth in the heart of every creature, O Arjuna, the master Ishvara, who by his magic power causeth all things and creatures to revolve mounted upon the universal wheel of time. the germ of omniscience, the knowledge of this unmodified reality, exists in man and becomes infinite in Ishvara. And Mr. Judge says that when a firm position is assumed with the end in view of reaching union with spirit through concentration, he, Ishvara, comes to the aid of the lower self and raises it gradually to higher planes. And Professor Iyer notes that man can move from the atomic to the infinite through mental awareness and change of consciousness if he grasps and applies the truth of the distinction between his ever-modified mind and his status as a soul, a spectator without a spectacle. And Patanjali goes on, at the time of concentration, the soul abides in the state of a spectator without a spectacle. The student whose mind is thus steadied obtains a mastery which extends from the atomic to the infinite. Tarka Raja Yoga refers explicitly to the system of development propounded by this sage Patanjali somewhere between the 4th century BCE and the 6th century of the current era. The system of the Yoga Sutras is that of a practitioner's manual, the pristine expression of Raja or royal yoga. It's certainly not to be confused with the Hatha yoga practices, which deal primarily with a subset of the principles in Raja yoga of postures and breathing, the asanas and pranayamas. Raja yoga is essentially concerned with mind control, meditation, and self-study. The Yoga Sutras are treated in a powerfully insightful way in Professor Iyer's The Gupta Vidya, Volume 3. The last 4 essays in Section 4 of that work are commentaries full of valuable insights into each of the 4 books of the Yoga Sutras. Like Patanjali, Professor Iyer begins his consideration of the Raja Yoga system as follows. True meditation begins with intense concentration or dharana, bringing the mind to a clear focus, which then gives way to the uninterrupted contemplation that is the beginning of dhyana. In its full unfoldment, it can lead to true wisdom, prajna, complete absorption in one's higher consciousness with universal self-consciousness, a state of being marked by the attunement of Atma Buddhi Manas to the cosmic triad. Samadhi Pada, Book 1, there's a crucial statement right at the very beginning, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, or concentration or yoga is the hindering of the modifications of the thinking principle, which is the essential meaning of what Patanjali called yoga. And Mr. Judge points out that upon this aphorism, the whole method of the system of yoga depends. He notes that the reason for the want of concentration at any point is that the mind is modified or affected by every subject or object that comes before it. So the use of concentration is equivalent to correcting that tendency to diffuseness, and thereby to use the mind as an instrument to know any subject or object that we choose, and to keep the mind focused upon it for as long as we wish, to the exclusion of everything else. For those taking up the practice of meditation and encountering a tendency to diffuseness, which is probably all of us, Patanjali gives us the practical corrective, and that is concentration. The power of concentration is something that we all have to varying degrees. We could hardly get by in the world without it. But here we are talking about taking up a deliberate practice to carry that power to a much higher level than we have ever had, using concentration with an intensity of will and a level of activity such that it serves as a barrier to thoughts, images, and feelings that we have not chosen to invite into our mental sphere. and to bring all of our conscious awareness to a single point that we have decided upon to the exclusion of all else, and to maintain that concentration for as long as we have chosen. As Mr. Judge says, if we do all our acts, small and great, every moment for the sake of the whole human race as representing the supreme self, then every cell and fiber of the body and inner man will be turned in one direction, resulting in perfect concentration. In Aphorism 5, Patanjali begins his discussion of the obstacles to meditation, what he calls the mental modifications, the chitta vrittis, and he describes their effects upon the mind. These chitta vrittis keep the mind in bondage, and with their removal, the mind can be free to return to its essential unmodified nature, which is bare subjectivity, or absolutely quiescent consciousness, or boundless bliss. Each of these modifications requires some further explanation, which you'll find in Mr. Judge's version of the Yoga Aphorisms in Book 1, or in Professor Iyer's commentaries on Book 1. So we'll dwell for just a moment on the first and the last of these chitta vrittis. It might seem strange that correct cognition, that is direct perception or valid inference, valid testimony, is listed as a modification of the mind. But the reason given by Professor Iyer is that Patanjali was concerned to deny that mundane insight and discursive thought and even scriptural authority can free the mind from bondage to delusion and suffering. And this is important to consider because the lower mind, with its conversational thinking and commonplace views and even knowledge of scripture, cannot free itself from bondage to Maya by those mental instruments because they are not capable of transcending that state of consciousness. There's no principle of self-transcendence in them. Further, to say that every human being is intrinsically capable of rising to the state of spiritual freedom called kaivalya in the Sankhya philosophy is to say that every human being is already what they seek to become. Our inmost nature is one with the highest reality. But the fact that we have to strive energetically to throw off our bondage is proof that we have allowed ourselves to become captive to Maya through self-limitation. So if we are seeking the cessation of these modifications, why not just go to sleep, which we know theosophically is the cessation of all mental activity of the lower mind. Besides the fact that sleep is one of the chitta vrittis, sleep is not a solution because it's the involuntary and passive cessation of mental activity. And what is required is fully conscious awareness, abhyasa, of whatever plane of mind we are on. In other words, sleep is a period of interruption of our continuity of consciousness or a passive withdrawal onto another plane of reality and not a spiritually active ascent. Abhyasa is the active opposite of passive sleep. And when combined with viraga, dispassionate detachment, they mirror in the manifest world that which is beyond that world, the changeless world of the spirit. If we're to find the transcendent and the immanent, abhyasa and viraga together are exactly what is called for. The other three modifications, misconception, fantasy, and memory, are also important to understand so that one can take the proper actions to hinder their effects upon manas. Our minds have grown accustomed to indulge and identify with and even find our comfort zone in endless modifications. And we know from even the initial practice that any effort to restrict their activity runs counter to our longstanding habits and tendencies. Well, the chittavrittis give rise to a set of obstacles that aggravate our tendency to mental distractions and enhance our fragmented consciousness. Those are, as you can see, disease, dullness, doubt, heedlessness, indolence, addiction to objects of sense, distorted perception, and failure to stabilize the mind in any particular state. And these sound like an inventory of a particularly bad day. And there's more. Those obstacles are further reinforced by grief, distress, trembling, and sighing. But Patanjali points out that all of the modifications, the obstacles, and further impediments can be eliminated through abhyasa, or the constant practice of a single truth or principle. Any profound truth which deeply moves one can be chosen. A pure spirit or Purusha is especially elevating. Affirming the luminous core of one's consciousness is more powerful than one's strongest negative proclivities and initiates a powerful force that acts against the cumulative momentum generated by the chittavrittis. Further, the mind needs to be purified through the practice of benevolence and tenderness, complacency, disregard for objects of happiness and grief, virtue and vice. Hence the enormous importance of detachment, resignation, forbearance, the performance of dharma and other observances or ascetic rules. When meditation reaches to wisdom, there arises that mental state of spiritual clarity and that knowledge which is absolutely free from error. All such efforts, this is from the Gupta Vidya Samadhi Pada essay, all such efforts to surmount the hindrances which distract the mind are aids to deep meditation. And when they have fully worked their benevolent magic, the becalmed mind becomes the effortless master of everything which comes into the horizon of consciousness, from the atomic to the infinite. This serene self-emancipation of consciousness is called Sabija Samadhi, meditation with a seed, the fulcrum for gaining all knowledge. In this sublime condition, the mind has become as pellucid as crystal and mirrors the spiritual light of Purusha, whence dawns direct insight, prajna, into the ultimate truth. Now, Book 2, Sadhana Pada, the aphorisms, is concerned with the practical means of concentration leading to meditation and eliminating afflictions. In Book 2, Patanjali begins by taking up the three main elements in the discipline of yoga. There's first austerity or self-restraint or mortification, we know as tapas. Secondly, self-study or self-examination or contemplation of Purusha, what Patanjali calls muttering or svadhyaya. And third, self-surrender to the Lord, Ishvara Pranidhana, or resignation to the Supreme Spirit, the omnipresent divine spirit within the secret heart. These comprise a threefold practice called sadhana of Book 2. They are said to be effective in the removal of the 5 afflictions or kleshas, or obstructions, which imprison Purusha. These practices are effective disciplines for the dual purpose of both establishing meditation and eliminating afflictions, which he gives in verse 3. Here are the 5 kleshas or afflictions, beginning with ignorance, and ignorance of vidya is identified as the cause of all the other mental afflictions. It gives rise principally to egoism, but it also gives rise to attachment, raga, the pursuit of what is thought to be pleasurable, and aversion, dvesha, the avoidance of what is thought to be painful, And lastly, all those combine to produce clinging to embodied existence. As you can see, these afflictions arise from the fundamental root problem of avidya, which is the first of the kleshas. In the Sankhya system, from which the Raja Yoga draws freely, the root cause of all ignorance is the misidentification of the substantive world of Prakriti with spirit, Purusha. The gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, or luminosity, action, and inertia, are the root qualities of Prakriti and continually modify the mind and bind it through habits or mental deposits. As Professor Iyer observed, from the point of view of Sankhya, all life without spiritual freedom is fraught with sorrow. Although it is not possible to avoid consequences already set in motion, it is feasible through yoga to destroy the kleshas and thereby remove the causal chain of suffering. And the fundamental problem common to all of us is our misidentification with the lower vestures and our ignorance of our true nature, our spiritual self, which is not a being separate from all other beings. Avidya also binds the ego to the pleasure-pain principle, raga and vesha, attachment and aversion. Professor Iyer notes that these two constitute the primary pair of opposites on the psychological level in the field of ignorance, and all other pairs of opposites are derived from them. Clinging to phenomenal existence is the logical outcome of the operation of ignorance, and once aroused is self-sustaining through the inertia of habit, so that countervailing measures are needed to eradicate it together with the other kleshas. These 5 kleshas have a distinctive remedy for their removal. These mental deposits can be dissolved by dhyana alone while giving the aspirant strength of will and the detachment needed to see beyond the field of the afflictions. Dhyana, along with the exercises which strengthen and support it, is the fundamental corrective needed to remove the kleshas and dissolve them once and for all. He says, as long as the kleshas remain, involuntary incarnation into bodies captive to the pleasure-pain principle is inescapable. Elation and depression are the inevitable effects of such embodiment. Since these are the product of egoism and the polarity of attraction and aversion, rooted in ignorance and resulting in the tenacious clinging to mundane existence, the discerning yogin comes to see that the truth of spiritual freedom and the rapture of limitless love transcend the kleshas entirely. As noted earlier, suffering arises through, Mr. Judge's words, egoism, the identifying of the power that sees with the power of seeing. That is, when the perceiver confounds Purusha with what is seen in the fields of experience, with Prakriti, which includes the objective world and the organs of perception. Patanjali notes that Prakriti exists for the sake of the soul, for the soul's edification and emancipation, and that the true nature of Purusha is emancipation. So the condition of Purusha when subject to the modifications of Prakriti is a condition of enslavement of some sort. That's why perhaps Patanjali characterizes the object of the Taraka Raja Yoga system as emancipation rather than absorption or bliss. He points to the state of pure consciousness as that of the simple, unqualified sense of I, which subsists in a pristine noumenal condition wherein it does not witness the ceaseless operation of the gunas. Patanjali says that the removal of the kleshas is accomplished through acquiring discriminative knowledge and keeping the object of true self-realization in view. And these constitute the effective pathway to spiritual emancipation, called kaivalya, from which delusion and enslavement to the afflictions cannot reoccur. Kaivalya is the supreme state that Raja Yoga leads to. The pathway to perfect discriminative knowledge is said in verse 27 to be comprised of ashta, 8, anga, limbs or stages. Therefore, we have the phrase Ashtanga Yoga, the 8-limbed yoga. And those are comprised of the 5 yamas, which are the forbearance or restraint. And the chief among these are ahimsa and satya, nonviolence and truth, followed by asteya, non-stealing, continence, brahmacharya, and non-possessions, aparigraha. And secondly, the 5 niyamas, the religious or the binding observances, and those are purity, contentment, austerity, and self-discipline, what we call tapas, self-study, svadhyaya, and ishvara pranidhana, surrender to the Lord. Also, there are postures, the asanas and the pranayamas, and then restraint, withdrawal from sensory engagement, pratyahara, and followed by the 3 stages of meditation, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. As can be seen, the first 5 of these stages or limbs have to do with action, practice, or karma, and Patanjali discusses these in great length in verses 29 through 54, showing the way, showing how to prepare properly for profound meditation. The last 3 have to do with meditation or contemplation, and he takes those up in book 3. It should be noted that in traversing the stages of the Taraka Raja Yoga system, truth and wisdom come gradually to the aspirant as the practices are developed further. Truth and wisdom are not just reserved for the last stage. And in the same manner, the practice begins by forbearance, but must also engage the other 7 limbs to some degree at the same time. This yoga practice is therefore recurrent, it's repeated, periodic, and iterative. It proceeds slowly, relying upon the natural growth cycle of the neophyte, and it draws upon the inherent tendency of nature to support efforts towards self-mastery and self-realization. The later aphorisms of Book 2 show why man is bound and why he can free himself, why he is actually ignorant and potentially omniscient. The soul is conjoined with the organ of thought and thus with nature. The conjuncture is caused by ignorance, but the quitting of bondage to matter is possible through perfect discriminative knowledge. Patanjali begins Vibhuti Pada, Book 3, with an axiom about attention, dharana, and then goes on to link it up to its continuance or contemplation called dhyana, and noting that when it is practiced in respect to a material object or subject, it's called meditation or samadhi. Dharana or attention is strengthened by the first 5 parts of the Ashtanga Yoga as they help to overcome the wandering of the mind. Dhyana is technically meditation as consciousness still encounters some modifications, but we are told by Patanjali they all flow in one direction and are not disturbed by other fluctuations. So consciousness can become unidirectional through experiencing a current of continuity in time. And samadhi is the deepening of dhyana until the chosen object of meditation stands alone and consciousness loses the sense of separateness from what is contemplated and in effect becomes one with it. Patanjali says that when the 3 of these are practiced with respect to one object, they constitute what is called sanyama. It's important to realize that sanyama, those 3 aspects of meditation, eventually can occur in one simultaneous act, the act of luminous concentration. And sanyama can then be used to proceed step by step to overcome all of the modifications of the mind. In the words of Professor Iyer, prajna, cognitive insight, the resplendent light of wisdom or intuitive apprehension comes as a result of mastering sanyama. Although prajna is the highest level of knowledge to which philosophy can aspire, it is not the supreme state, for it halts at the threshold of pristine awareness of reality, which can be neither articulated nor elucidated. The rest of the book 3 aphorisms concern the yogic attainments, a cycle in which the individual creates as the spirit creates, by ideation, by constructive manifestation, through the power of projection. One really should read these aphorisms, they're 23 through 56, to get a grasp of how exalted and rare the attainment of such powers really are. Book 4, Kaivalya Pada, says more about the perfections, and I won't try to capture Patanjali's statements with a too short summary, but we'll just recommend that everyone read those 12 pages of Kaivalya Pada. Clearly, Dhyana Marga is not as simple as just closing one's eyes and sitting for meditation. It is a path within a path, one that has its own demanding requirements. Meditation itself is not just another item to add to our daily to-do list. It's a rigorous discipline that, if engaged in with diligent energy and detachment, abhyasa and viraga, will lead the aspirant to totally reorient their life around the Ishtadeva, one's chosen spiritual teacher, the one self within each and all. Thank you.
I can't hear you, Jonathan. Can everybody hear Jonathan?
No, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much, John, very much. By the way, you don't have that to offer as a written document, would you? And if people asked for it?
Actually, I could, put the notes together into a written document. I did want to mention one other thing, Jonathan. I put together all of the quotations that appeared in the talk in a separate document, along with links to the Theosophy Trust essays from the Gupta, from Hermes on the Yoga Sutras, plus the original translations, Professor Iyer's translations of the Yoga Sutras, plus several other texts that people downloadable copies of the Gupta Vidya, so that people could do their own research, and they're all digitized. So I'd like to pass that on before we finish tonight, so that people can have that document.
Yeah, I was thinking a podcast, incredible essay, and like you say, a list of quotations. Would that be okay if people replied to their invite emails to Truth, and then he forwarded those requests and
certainly, however you'd like to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we have some time here, about a half an hour for Q&A, and Nathan, you look like you're ready to ask your question.
Well, just thank you so much, John, for that wonderful talk. And and all of it's like the DVD with the bonuses. we're gonna get access to those.
They're party favors, Nathan.
Right. Oh, but something, just a simple question, but I'm sure it would be interesting to explore. Well, you pointed out, Patanjali mentions the connection between abhyasa and Vairagya. So, which is like perseverance and detachment, or yeah. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that connection as we begin on or continue along this path.
So you're asking about the connection between abhyasa and viraga, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very interesting point, and Professor Iyer makes kind of underlines that in one of his essays, so to speak. It's because I think one of the reasons why abhyasa is so emphasized is that this discipline of meditation needs to be entered into with great intensity and energy. It's not something that one does, to pass the time, or you really have an object in view. And that object in view is the cessation, the hindering of those modifications, of true self-realization of what it eventually leads to. And so abhyasa means, assiduity, that is energetic practice. And we know that meditation is not the kind of thing that you can do, say, once a week or every couple of weeks, it's fine. It's fine to do that. But if you're a serious student who's pursuing the discipline of meditation, it requires quite a bit more effort than that, I would think. And viraga, of course, is absolutely essential. And we know from its location in the 7 paramitas, its location is the 4th paramita, which is sort of the balance point. It's like a fulcrum upon which the success or failure of the enterprise rests. It's right in the center, and we know that detachment is required to sustain one's efforts over a long period of time. And this Ashtanga Yoga, the Dhyana Marga, if anything, is a path that extends over lives. It's not just a one lifetime event. So those two together are essential, as he says, to find the transcendent in the immanent, because it results are a long time coming, perhaps. And it also, we need to free our intellect and our mind to be able to direct our energies correctly. So that's all.
Thank you.
Oh, Robert?
Yes, in the Aquarian series, and also in the training at ULT Santa Barbara, we have weekly themes. So this week, it's Dhyana Marga. Last week is Head Learning and Soul Wisdom. So how does this trying to concentrate on weekly themes help us surrender to Ishvara?
How does keeping the weekly themes in mind help us to surrender to Ishvara? That's an interesting question. It really has to do with how to put it, going in and out of different states of consciousness. We have to be in the world, and we have to deal with the world as it is. Most of us work, and even if we don't, we still have to deal with other people at the market and everywhere else around the city or the neighborhood. And it goes without saying, we're not sitting down meditating intently 24 hours a day. That's a practice that we reserve, for maybe a few times a day, maybe early in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. So what do we do with our minds with the rest of the time we're out doing stuff? Well, these themes are a way of creating a line of meditation. They seem to be created or birthed, so to speak, as friends of the line of life's meditation. They are coordinate themes. They all go together. They all sort of are going in the same direction. And they're different facets of ideas of mental life, spiritual life, social life. And they give the mind a way to maintain its connection and maintain that vibration to the deeper, say, line of life's meditation that one touches upon in deep meditation and in sanctifying activities that we see as sacrifices on behalf of all. And I think the idea is to link together our various states of consciousness from our deepest meditations to our mundane, events that when we encounter people out in the world. So it seems to me it's a way of linking together all those sacred points, that sacred stream of ideation, and they should all coordinate with each other.
Okay, thank you, John.
Hi, John. You referred a few times to Purusha and Ishvara. To what extent are they identical, or are they extinct, or they have nothing to do with each other?
Okay, good question. I'm not exactly sure if Ishvara appears, well, let me back up one step. So Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is, as I mentioned in the talk, is very dependent and draws freely upon Sankhya philosophy. And Sankhya philosophy is kind of based upon this idea of Purusha and Prakriti, of Purusha as the divine spirit, which in and of itself has no, so to speak, contact with Prakriti. There's a gulf between them in Sankhya, I believe. And so Purusha is like the monad. It stands behind and is separate from and is uninvolved. Like in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, I created this whole universe with a portion of myself and yet remains separate. He's totally unaffected by what goes on on the material side. So it has that, it's kind of the universal aspect of the divine that's being referred to there. My understanding of Ishvara is that it's the, so to speak, the meeting of the transcendent in the immanent, so to speak. It's the presence of the Purusha within the individual human being. And it's given another name because of that. It's called Ishvara, the self within, the highest self within man. And so it's treated a bit differently, in language, but I think that's the essential difference. One is the totally transcendent divine principle, and the other, Ishvara, is the principle of divinity immanent within the world of humanity.
Thank you. Well, I have another question. Your talk is called Dhyana Marga. So are we talking Raja Yoga or a Buddhist path? What is the distinction there? Why would I go for the one or the other? Even though there are many elements that are the same, but also many elements that are different. So which path do we actually go for then? Do we have to make a choice, or is that a matter of personal proclivities, or why would I go for the one or the other? I can't go for both at the same time.
So which are the two paths? What's the other path besides Tarka Raja Yoga?
The Buddhist path
Uh-huh.
or Raja Yoga.
Mm.
There are things that are the same. There are things that are different too. So it would be kind of hard to mix them both up. It seems to me that the Raja Yoga path seems to be more, quote unquote, simple, because when I look at a lot of Buddhist elements, you get lost in all kinds of side issues, so to speak.
Right.
So what distinction would we make there between those two?
I don't really quite know, Pierre, how to respond accurately to this, because I don't really know what the Buddhist path would be exactly. Because, I mean, you got the Mahayana and the, Hinayana, Theravadan, and then you've got lots of sort of gradation, a scale of different beliefs in different countries and different cultures. So I'm really not sure how to respond to that. But let me just say that in relation to the voice of the silence, the path enumerated in the voice of the silence in those three fragments. And, I was puzzled when I first started reading the Yoga Sutras, because, right on the very first page of the voice of the silence, it says, "He who would hear the voice of nada, the soundless sound, and comprehend it, he has to learn the nature of dharana." And then in that footnote, she says, which we've all probably read 1,000 times, dharana is the intense and perfect concentration of the mind upon some one interior object, accompanied by complete abstraction from everything pertaining to the external world or world of the senses. So, and then you look at various other things in the voice. It talks about the fourth gate's latch of viraga, but then it talks about the various stages, like the sixth stage and the seventh stage, and those very clearly refer to the threefold dharana, dhyana, samadhi, those three states of meditation. Now, whether those are just sort of universally understood in Eastern religions to mean a certain thing, or whether they are have a certain level of uniqueness to Patanjali, I don't know. I know that Patanjali's Yoga Sutras are in some ways a compendium of teachings that were very ancient, going back to the Vedas, and certain ideas that he propounds can be found there as well. But in the voice, it's also curious because Dhyana Marga is described as a path within a path. So Dhyana Marga is kind of set aside as having its own requirements and strictures and its own disciplines. And all of that fits within this larger path of ethical perfections and the path of perfection and the path of action. So that's really about all I can say. I just got real excited when I started seeing Patanjali's terminology being used in the voice of the silence, because it was like a revelation. There are obviously very strong connections, and I'm sure with the Buddhist teachings as well.
Thank you.
Can I call on Jeff? Jeff Clark?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, it's great. I really enjoy your explanation, so clear. I'm a Buddhist and I'm not a great meditator, but I just want to say, and I have a question as well. Well, of course, the Voice of the Silence mixes Buddhism and what we now call Buddhism and Hinduism pretty freely. I mean, Patanjali's there. I'm talking from Japan. Am I breaking up?
Yeah, no, I'm still here understanding what you're saying.
Okay,
Go
okay.
ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so, I don't see anything like reading Patanjali. There's a lot of overlap with Buddhism. I mean, obviously, they're both, traditions based in Indian experience or on the subcontinent. I think one thing is that in Buddhism we have samatha and vipassana, so two different kinds of meditation that are considered to be complementary. So vipassana is stimulating, and samatha is something that calms you down. So, for example, in Lam Rim by Tsongkhapa, this is recommended by HPB. The Lam Rim is kind of, Tsongkhapa gives this overview of Buddhist teachings. And in what is now the third volume, it's been translated, a wonderful translation into English. In the second and third volumes of that translation, it goes over each of the paramitas. There's six paramitas in Buddhism. And the final third volume is about dhyana and prajna. And they translate dhyana as meditative stabilization. And so Tsongkhapa gives a lot of detail about the necessity that if you're just trying to calm your mind, you're going to be zonked out. You're not. You kind of go into almost like a sleep-like state that you need. Okay, well, this is what it says. You can read it and see what he's considered the greatest by a lot of people, the greatest Tibetan saint and practitioner of meditation as well. And this is kind of a common idea in Buddhism. It's not just him. It's all over the place that you need that stimulation of an object that's there in vipassana. And then samatha is just, calming yourself. So you need the complement. So that's what I want to ask. Is this there in Hindu tradition or the traditions that you've looked at? This idea of because I guess that like we talk about bipolarity. Well, I guess there's bipolarity is sort of a basic feature of human nature, in that we can get overexcited, we can have an excited state or sort of a lazy lethargic state. And so the vipassana would be an antidote for the tendency toward lethargy, whereas samatha would be cure the tendency toward overexcitedness. So I'm wondering, did you see in Patanjali anything that was along these lines?
Just to take up one point about using opposites, I think we encountered that strategy, so to speak, frequently, both in Buddhism and in Patanjali too, where he talks about applying the opposites. So if you have a bout of anger, you apply kindness. You apply the opposite. If you are tempted to steal something, you apply the opposite of giving, that is, of beneficence, of magnanimity, and so on. So there's that point. But one point, I think all the teachers that I've read on in the theosophical tradition really caution against passivity and sleepiness because for this reason, the condition that the neophyte is growing towards is that of adeptship. And the adept is in total control of all of his vestures, all of his lower vestures. And slipping into a passive state is absolutely kind of going in the opposite direction from going in the direction of adeptship. It's going in the direction of mediums who are passive to external influences, who are governed by elementals, who don't have control over their energies or their vestures. So that's clearly the wrong thing to do. And Judge very specifically recommends that if you begin to fall asleep while you're meditating, stop, open your eyes, and do something else. Anything is better than falling asleep while trying to engage in meditation. As far as the rest of what she said, I really can't really add much to it. Maybe someone else can has something to add.
I
Yeah,
had, oh yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
No,
Well,
I'm
I
just going
had
to
You go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Jeff.
Yeah, do it, Jonathan.
Oh, well, I just had a comment and then a question. I was just thinking with reference to the Raja Yoga compared to the Buddhist approach with meditation and so forth, Patanjali, Voice of the Silence, a couple of things, and these might serve to actually make things more confusing rather than less, but we'll see what happens. One is on page 157, 158 of the Secret Doctrine, first volume. You have that comparison of the different systems. And you have what she's calling the esoteric Buddhism, which is really kind of a theosophical presentation. Then you have the Vedanta, with the 5 principles. And then you have the Taraka Raja Yoga. And that's giving some classification of human principles. But one would think that that would have a bearing on the practice of meditation in terms of the alignment of those principles and the usages of those principles. And interestingly enough, she mentions that whatever you do, whatever system you adopt, the Taraka Raja Yoga, everybody has to eventually basically use some version of that because for some reason it's the most practical. And at some level, it does reduce the main centers of gravity, so to speak, to 3. You have the higher transcendental, you have like a middle region, and then you have the more physical levels of things. And she says a few other things about those differentiations, but one would think that they would apply to the alignment of those principles as well. And now the other thing that occurred to me in terms of synthesizing them, and I don't know if this will help, but to me, it's just very interesting. I mean, I've been thinking about it lately, is that the same teacher was teaching HPB, who was teaching T. Subbarao. And T. Subbarao was a Vedantin. And HPB was a Theosophist, but also my humble understanding is that she was being taught kind of in the context of a Buddhist. And she declared herself a Buddhist in different occasions. So, and that the same mysterious adept, Mahatma, was the teacher of them both. So at least in the mind of that Mahatma, there's a synthesis. Whether we can make our own synthesis, I don't know. But to me, that's just interesting. And nothing really conclusive can be drawn from that. But I had a question, and I think I'll save my question till later. It looks like there's a question from either Jim or Michelle.
Well, just in this whole discussion right now, I wonder, I'm going to borrow something that Kirk Radin said the other day about simplify. That really gets one to thinking about this in relation to all kinds of questions and concerns we have. And so I thought just now, okay, There is one system. In the deepest sense, we're told there is actually one system of meditation. However, that's never revealed. But that one system is genuinely reflected in any multitude of systems. What then becomes dialectically helpful is if a person with their temperament chooses a system that seems to hold for them intuitive promise, because by virtue of being true to that system and not trying to confuse themselves with 19 other systems, but just taking that one, selecting it deliberately, and then being true to it, begins to awaken the power within it that reflects that one fundamental system of meditation, which is supreme. Because that's how you start getting to the one, is through the many. And so if a person is true to that, it seems to this student that then you will begin to have a sense of what might be another step. And you might begin then to be able to find another system that actually relates to the first system, but is somewhat more richer in its complexity. So to me, it just seems like starting somewhere and staying with it is as important as all kinds of studies can do, because the one is reflective of the many, and the many can turn back to the one.
John, did you have anything to add to that before we go to Jeff?
No, I think that was an excellent resolution of the question.
Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, that was super, Jim. And just to sort of build on what you were talking about, Jonathan, I translated the Voice of the Silence into Japanese, and when I was doing that, I was looking at parallels between like the eightfold Ashtapada. Is that the eightfold the
Ashtanga?
Patanjali's Ashtanga, thank you. And also there's a Chinese Zen diagram that has the 10 oxen. Have you ever seen that? Or maybe somebody's familiar with that. And it shows the path, the Dhyana Marga, from discovering the ox. The ox is our primary energy, and discovering the traces of it, and then following the ox, and then taming the ox, and then becoming one with the ox, and then going from there to be a bodhisattva. And when you compare that, for example, the number 8 in the ox picture, they're all circles, and this is like a blank circle, just a circle with nothing in it. So that would correspond to the 8th one. There's 10 ox pictures, but the 8th one is samadhi. So it was the complete union of the ox or the other and self. And that would also correspond to Scorpio, the 8th sign of the zodiac. So when you look at Subbo Rao's 12 signs of the zodiac, there's a lot of correspondences there as well. I'm saying, and this is pointing to what Jim said, there's a complete system underlying all of these other systems. And if you begin to compare some of these, you find traces that link the zodiac, that link like I was saying, this ancient Chinese diagram and the Patanjali's eightfold system. But that's a discussion for another day. But that's definitely there. If you know, there's a lot of the symbolism in the Voice of the Silence. It also appears in the 10 ox pictures.
Jeff, John would just a couple of things. One is that our time is up, and so that anyone who would like to leave, obviously they can, which is true anytime. But anyway, the other ththing is I was wondering if you could indulge me in maybe one last question. And this question has to do with, in the Voice of the Silence, it says that the mind needs breadth and depth and points to draw it towards a diamond soul. Seek not for these points in Maya's realm, I think it says. I was wondering if you could talk about I mean, I've always thought of breadth as like kind of breadth of ideas, and depth might be, well, deep ideas, but also a depth of feeling perhaps. But the points, I was wondering if you could talk about the points possibly in reference to continuity of consciousness and meditation.
Hmm.
Or just talk about what you think the points even are.
Well, they can be really anything, any truth that one approves of, is to use Patanjali's language. You could take the truths of the Ashtanga yoga, the yamas, nonviolence, ahimsa as a truth, or satya, truth in the abstract and truth in the concrete. The virtue of non-stealing, asteya, or continence, spiritual continence, brahmacharya. All of those are ideas that one could take up as objects of meditation in order to understand them more thoroughly. And they do provide what I like about the idea about the breadth is, we sometimes talk about the breadth of a person's character. In other words, they've traveled, they've had a wide variety of experiences, they've had to deal with people of all sorts, not just a very small coterie of people who think the same way. And so they've had to make adjustments in their understanding of the larger self, the self of made up by communities of human beings. And it gives one kind of more stability. It's like if you take a car and you have a narrow wheelbase, it's not very stable, but you take that wheelbase like on a Porsche and you spread it way out there, it's very stable going around curves and in motion. So I think it's that idea of stability through breadth is one of its fascinating characteristics. And the points, as I said, one could really there's such a wealth of points to choose from. And the important thing is to find one and stick with it, as Jim was saying, in the same way with a technique. Find points that you can keep coming back to. This process, as I mentioned in the talk, it's repetitive, it's iterative, it's cyclical, and one grows over time, and growth is slow. It takes sometimes quite a while till realization dawns on us about the meaning of an idea, and we grow with that idea over time. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Extremely helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you, John, for such a wonderful power-packed presentation. And it's something, speaking of iterative, this is a presentation that a person can view over and over again, etc. So, John, thank you very, very much for putting this together. Magnificent.
Welcome. Thank you, Jonathan, for asking me to do it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Thanks, John.